There were 5 Hope 6 grants that this community was able to obtain from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
We saw a public housing site get transformed, but we still had parcels and buildings literally right across the streets. The reinvestment never occurred.
Without the infrastructure around the housing, you still don't have necessarily a better neighborhood. You have a great development.
HUD had this Choice Neighborhood program. It was kind of a follow-up to the Hope 6 program,
Which not only targets the public housing site, but it looks at multiple properties that are adjacent or that are coexisting in close proximity.
It's really all about identifying the heartbeat in each neighborhood and figuring out how can we invest in that area and let that be the light for the area around it to grow.
In South City, we have a Choice Neighborhoods grant that will replace all of the public housing on the Foot Home site. But it's also designed to have what's called a neighborhood impact, and it also has a people impact.
Foot Homes is one of the oldest public housing developments in the nation.
They were some of the first housing units that were built for blacks at that time. Large public housing development. We want to reinvest in this neighborhood, and we would want that to be the light. We want that to be what you think about when you think about this space, not the blight that you used to see, but this new reimagined space.
You get away from this warehousing of the very low income folks and create an opportunity for them to continue to live in their neighborhood. And also it's mixed income, so you have an opportunity to interact with people from all socioeconomic levels, which is important. It also symbolizes a great opportunity to provide better housing and a better quality of life for the returning residents as well as new residents that will move into the development. And hopefully a significant impetus for additional development around South Memphis and moving toward downtown and back toward the south and the southeast. A lot of things happen to make this project become a reality despite all of the significant challenges. And one of the questions we were constantly asked about this project was, why don't you redevelop what's here as opposed to demolish and do new construction? And one of the answers is the fact that we literally had to clean up the environmental contamination that was not just here but in the site altogether.
So, there was a lot of strife, frankly, in terms of people having a fear of redevelopment of public housing sites in Memphis.
A lot of that pushback was rooted in ensuring that the families that were living there were going to have a space in any new development that took place.
We took a lot of criticism about this project, from people who said we're trying to gentrify their neighborhood, we're trying to displace poor people. And that was the furthest from my mind. So what I guess I learned is the fact that you just have to take your hits and then continue to fight for what you believe in and what you know is right, despite the criticism and the critics, because at the end of the day, what you're doing will be much, much better for the people you're trying to help than what's here or what was here before.
Urban Strategies was brought to Memphis to provide support services through Memphis Housing Authority and the Women's Foundation.
This has been a 3+ year effort. We've got a lot of residents that are relocating, and they are extremely happy about what you see around here.
Early on, we started working with families as to where they wanted to live.
In doing that with the case managers, going to the various landlords, going to the various properties, helping them think about the school, the grocery stores, the doctor's office.
Everything, relocation services to education services to financial literacy services.
That holistic approach also gives the confidence to the families that they are cared about and that there's an expectation also on the other side that they would equip themselves so that when they come back, they're prepared to live a new and a different, empowering life.
They're really doing one-on-one work with them. They're doing group work with them just so they can understand their true needs.
Hey Gladys, how are you? Can I come in? Okay.
We're hoping that 300 families return.
This is gorgeous. Thank you. It's beautiful.
But we know families have a choice. If they want to return, we're doing everything we can to ensure that they return.
I moved in an old home actually in 2005. When I moved out, it was like 2016. They was redeveloping and everything. From the old home to the new, I feel that transition.
You know, there's the human side of all of this work, and that families have to have a space that they can call their own.
Before I ever got this or knew I was gonna get it, me and my son used to pull up right here and pray for it, like I want this house. So when she told me I was 501 St. Paul, I already knew what it looked like because I had been sitting here asking God for it. Miss Rose has always looked out for me, so I know she's gonna continue to do that.
The transformation in these communities is really what we as a city and a community are striving toward. And now you have a $1 billion investment in the form of the walk. That investment would not have taken place but for the redevelopment of South City.
I think when you look at the reinvestment and the rebuilding of the existing infrastructure, where we now see improvements to roads, there's landscaping, there's new parks that are coming in, all centering around this new housing, and there's new commercial and retail that's been planned as a result of it. And that brings all of the key factors together to redefine and redevelop and bring forth the South City community.
Taryn Gress. I'm the Strategic Director at the National Initiative on Mixed Income Communities. And I am going to share, hopefully successfully right now, some slides to give you. So I was asked today to do a bit of an overview of kind of the mixed income context. And really around creating inclusive, equitable mixed income communities. And our center, so I'll give you some context, approaches to mixed income, what does mixed income success look like, and where are we doing well, and maybe where do we need some more attention, and some implications for policy and practice. So I want to give you a sense of who we are. We're a national organization. We're based in Cleveland, Ohio, where I am today. And our mission is really to promote urban equity and inclusion through impact research that achieves more effective, durable social change. And our ultimate vision is more equitable and inclusive communities and cities. And our roles and services include research and evaluation, networking and convening information, sharing information that we've learned about our work in mixed income communities and our research. And then our consultation work has expanded over the last few years, and our partner who's on today, Frankie Blackburn, a lot of the work in our consultation world has been with her and her organization. And so she'll be sharing more about that. So there are three disturbing societal trends in the US. There are more, but I'll mention three today that are around and really motivate us around mixed income. So there's the haves and have-nots, increased social inequality, inequitable access to opportunity, us versus them dynamics,
All right. Is Ms. Gress being added back by IT? Is IT available to assist Ms. Gress in re-entering the session?
There have been a slight interruption in her internet connection. If that happens, try to refresh the page or jump back in, and we will do what we can. Seeing a couple of very funny quotes in the chat. Hopefully everything's all right with her internet, but with everyone working from home, there's sort of a lot of our networks are being sort of interrupted. I see that she has rejoined. I see her name just popped up in the notifications on my side. So we're going to wait until Ms. Gress. Hey, there we go.
Sorry about that. I didn't even notice. So where was I? Introducing National Initiative on Mixed Income Communities. Did I get beyond that point?
Yes, you were on the 3 societal problems.
Okay. All right. So let's see. So haves and have-nots, us versus them, who benefits? So how can we solve some of these issues? We think that thriving, inclusive, mixed income buildings and communities could be part of that solution. And so that includes shared access to investment and amenities, bridging social divides through proximity, increased social networks and social capital, demonstrating that economic and social vitality of diversity, and then changing mental models and influencing individual decision making. We define mixed income communities rather broadly.
Karen, would you mind resharing your slides? We can't see them.
Oh, thanks. Sure. Let's see, I have it up, but it doesn't seem to wanna.
So in the meantime, I guess if you could still keep speaking to your slides.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So, and just it's giving everyone a sense that we're not narrowly defining mixed income communities, but there really are places where those can live in poverty, have moderate incomes and higher incomes. And again, setting the stage of context of mixed income, wanted to give a sense of the mixed income history, beginning in Massachusetts in the 1970s to inclusionary housing initiative across Montgomery County, Maryland, to these intentional public housing redevelopment strategies through Hope 6, citywide initiatives in Atlanta, Chicago, San Francisco, and then what was
All right, so we lost folks.
Ms. Walton, I believe Mr. Willis is trying to rejoin our session as well. If someone could assist Archie Willis with rejoining the session.
Yes, I have reached out to him in the direct messages, and we're trying to get him online as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
If it's the screen sharing that's causing an issue with the connection, then maybe let's try and keep it to just visually talking through. I know this is terribly annoying for those who are joining as participants, but the slides will be available. I just want us to be able to hear from our presenters today, so we can get through this.
All right. In the interim, while we're waiting for Ms. Gress and Mr. Willis to rejoin our session, Ms. Blackburn, if you would like to move forward and share your perspective with us, since you're still hanging in our session, you're still with us. I know you're accustomed to partnering with Ms. Gress. Unfortunately, she's not rejoined our session at this time.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear everyone. Are we working now?
We are.
Thank you. I'm happy to go forward. My name is Frankie Blackburn. I'm sitting in a little village, Saxapahaw, North Carolina. I work in a small company of 3 or 4 partners called Trusted Space Partners. we're practitioners in the work of community building and have been partnering with the National Initiative for many years in a lot of communities. And basically, I'll just say I am a longtime believer in mixed income housing and mixed race housing all my life, really. But I'm the first to acknowledge that, and I think what Taryn will tell you in a minute with her slides, is that there are a lot of places where it has not worked, and we have to be truthful about that. But I still believe in it because I have been fortunate to have some direct experience seeing it work, not all the time, but I definitely have some. And at Trusted Space Partners, we've come to believe that there's a set of key ingredients that are really important to have in place. Now, they're not the only ingredients, and we don't know it all. We're still learning. But I'd like to offer what those ingredients are, and then tell the application of those ingredients through two brief stories. And maybe at that point, if Taryn can pull up my slides, but not yet, Taryn, I'm doing good without them. So first of all, it's really important in this work to start with a truthful narrative. We have to start with the truth about race and class in a particular neighborhood, and the truth of the complicit role of a lot of the institutions involved, even well-intended institutions. And without that truthful narrative, we really can't move forward. The second ingredient is to really understand that even as hard as it is to build all the buildings and create all the programs, that we have to even go further and focus on the underlying soil, if you will, the conditions, the environment, the operating culture, we call it. That is the buildings and the programs are being built on top of. For the most part, in all of our experiences when we work in communities, we find that the underlying operating culture in communities is often filled with fear, with isolation, and with anger. And what we're looking to do is to try to shift that operating culture to a place where people feel a sense of healing, a sense of connection, and shared aspiration. It's super hard to do. You can't do it by yourself, can't do it by a few people. So the key is to be able to figure out how to offer a compelling invitation to all the stakeholders involved to come into this new operating culture that we're trying on. And so that takes me to my third ingredient, which is to really focus on the creation of intentional spaces. It's only through changing the way that we gather in community life and changing the way we meet, the way we connect, and having it be more of a human-centered way of coming together, are we going to be able to shift that underlying operating culture. And because of all of our histories and all of our differences, a few of us at least, need to bring, and this is my fourth ingredient, a new set of intentional practices into those intentional spaces. Practices that allow us to be our best selves in these spaces. Everybody has a best self. And practices that allow us to bring out the wisdom in everyone. There is wisdom everywhere, no matter what a person's life circumstances are. So we have to create these spaces and these practices over and over and over and over again to be able to shift that underlying operating culture. And then the last ingredient that is really so important is to understand that to sustain those spaces and those practices, we need to steward a new community network and not lead a new community organization. We have enough community organizations, but we need a new network that allows us to focus on connecting and connecting differently over time, long period of time. This doesn't shift overnight. So it takes building an infrastructure. It's not just an amorphous network. It's an infrastructure of stewards rotating over time. So those are our 5 ingredients. It's much more complex than that, of course. So let me just quickly show up. I don't know, Taryn, if you're going to be able to show a few of the pictures. I want to tell you the story of Angie Rogers. She actually was born and bred in Memphis. She's a dear friend of mine now. She was called on to run a public housing transformation initiative in Washington, D.C. This is now about 5 or 6 years ago. It was an initiative, if you go to the first slide, that was in really disarray, very complex. Angie is the one there on the right with the yellow boppers on her head. She's sitting next to 2 public housing residents. 4 things that I think that were really right that I want to offer also in addition to these ingredients. When she got into her leadership position with the District of Columbia, she acknowledged that she was stuck and that the initiative was stuck on this issue of operating culture, the issue of the environment, the connections between residents, neighbors, stakeholders. And secondly, she went looking for help. We were one of the groups that was called in to work in partnership with her. And she didn't just like turn it over to us. What we did is we forged a very close partnership. We had to build trust. We had to go to the drawing board with our philosophy and approach and listen to her philosophy and approach. And we shaped a framework and some guiding principles to guide our work. And then she had to enroll other people into this work with us. And she was so consistent in her messaging and in showing up in the spaces that we were creating. She didn't just show up once, twice, 3 times. She showed up 85% of the time in these rooms. And that is a picture of that. And then lastly, you know, we admitted when we were hitting a brick wall and had to turn to the left or turn to the right. And she was able to do that. We did that together. You're always adapting in this work to your conditions and what's going on. So just quickly, Karen, just want to slide to the next one. The next 2 slides show you the framework. I don't have time to go into them in detail, but we have a lot of material we can provide later. But the important thing is what's at the center of this picture. We put changing the culture to an aspirational and connected operating culture at the very center of our framework. And there's many strategy pages behind that blue triangle there, very detailed. It's not a soft thing, it's a hard thing. The next slide is an example of a detailed picture of the strategy at the neighborhood level. It shows a picture of building this network. If you envision, if you will, a wide, big tent that people are being invited into to try on these new spaces and these new connections. And it's very iterative. It goes around and around and it builds out and it gets bigger and bigger. So more and more people are understanding that we can come together and co-create and co-invest and see each other's work, no matter our position in society. And then the next slide, I want to zero in on one of those intentional spaces that we've had good luck with, that really has seemed to work. It's not the only one, but we call it Network Night. And it's usually a monthly or every other week gathering in a neighborhood, 90 minutes long. We often refer to it as party with a purpose. We do 4 things. We have fun and have food, of course, but then we spend a little bit of time getting to know each other. We spend some time having small group conversations about the things we want to talk about that night, not about a predetermined agenda. And at the very end, we come back together in a large circle for what we call marketplace, where we exchange small favors with each other as human beings, not as professionals to residents to neighbors. And in those exchanges of small favors, that's where we begin to get to know each other and build the kind of trust. And if you could go to the next slide, this is like I'm going fast through 3 or 4 years worth of effort. The next slide, again, you can't read it all, but I want you to see that is summing up 6 months, the first 6 months of intensive effort to try to shift the operating culture in this neighborhood. And you see, Neighbor at Night was just one of the intentional spaces. We did neighborhood walks, pop-up parties, a Neighbor Up campaign where we worked on the issue of belonging and what does it mean to belong in a neighborhood where new people are moving in and you've been there for so long and you don't feel like you belong. Tea talks. I mean, this is an elaborate strategy that we helped develop. And then just the last picture here in this story is a picture of 2 people that represent for me an outcome of all this work. Kendra in the blue had lived in the public housing community in the Parkview neighborhood for many years, and Liz in the red had moved in 3 or 4 years ago as a homeowner, a community leader in the neighborhood association. The 2 of them started exchanging small favors. I think Kendra helped Liz with her indoor plants, and I think Liz helped Kendra because Liz had a truck, and we go shopping sometimes together. But now they have a friendship. They're not best friends, but they have a friendship, and they're going to be a part of the fabric of that community moving forward and making decisions and moving and driving the deeper change that needs to happen. I'll do one more slide and one more quick story, and I'll go back to either Karen or Archie. It's a whole other strategy where we were in Pittsburgh working with a private development company that was doing a lot of the affordable housing development in Pittsburgh, mixed income housing development. Really good developers, great at financing, great at design, really quality product, but they were admitting that they didn't know how to operate the community once it was occupied as well as they wanted to. So we've been working with them for over a 5-year period to really focus on their strategy of how to do that in a different way. All the things I just said, but applying it in a company and at a site level. And so we've written a paper about our work with them, and would love to share that with you. But one thing I'll leave you, and it's the last slide, is I love this. The CEO of this company believed in radical hospitality. And so with him, we created a set of covenants for everyone, and it's the next slide, if you can go to it, a set of covenants for everyone in their company to pledge to, behavioral covenants, and for how they would behave on a day-to-day basis in this community. And we're asking the residents to pledge to these behaviors too, because it's a two-way street, right? No matter who the resident is and the staff person. I'm just going to read the last one at the right hand because I love it. It says, we pause to listen and understand without acting upon a snap judgment. We ask questions to learn new perspectives and reveal new ideas for recurring problems. Now just imagine if we could get everyone, or not everyone, but at least 40% of the neighborhood adhering to this behavior with each other, how we might begin to see why and how a mixed income community really can work. So thank you, and I'll turn it back. I don't know which one, Archie or Karen. I'll let Melandria decide.
I believe we do have time to circle back to Ms. Grass. Ms. Grass, if you would, continue with your presentation.
Let me share. I'm going to stop sharing and then see if I can share. Just before I leave you, I wanted to highlight a few things. So this first slide, this is around the kind of question around what are some of the potential approaches to mixed income that go beyond Hope 6 and choice neighborhoods. And so two great sources, my colleagues and including Frankie and many, many other authors have been working on a volume of essays that includes people who are doing practice, policy, research, and it's called What Works to Promote Inclusive, Equitable, Mixed Income Communities. And so it really spans a whole breadth of topics. And it's just, we've been releasing the essays over the last year online, and then the actual volume with this cover will be also available. And then I wanted to promote our new podcast that is based on the volume. And so our co-hosts are our director, Mark Joseph, and our research director, Amy Kare, and they'll be talking with authors about these different issues. So a couple approaches I wanted to highlight that are also there, you can find essays about them, so more in-depth information are inclusionary housing, to approach to mixed income, this MTO fund, which is an approach where our colleague Hans Buder has developed a strategy where you purchase a market rate property, insert affordable housing. It also has a programming and educational imperative. So the families who enter those affordable units are supported. It's a high opportunity neighborhood, high opportunity school district. And so there's a strategy that he's developed around that, and we're going to be part of the evaluation of it. He's identified his first property in Dallas, and the MTO part, some of you may recognize this from Moving to Opportunities, building off of some of the research that Raj Shetty and others that demonstrate that if children live in high opportunity areas when they're young and are supported in the right way, that they have a greater social impact outcomes. And so there's a double bottom line in this strategy of the social impact and also the market kind of dividends that are coming out of the housing. So that's a different type of strategy to mixed income. Community land trusts, where there's co-ownership or ownership from the community. And there's an essay in the volume around how can we get what is often a small scale strategy of community land trust to be larger scale, but it's still doing what a community land trust can do, which is to protect against displacement. And then the qualified allocation plans refer to the related to the low-income housing tax credit. So how can those allocation plans that each state puts out incorporate an explicit mixed income strategy in them? And then local policy levers around zoning, so more inclusionary zoning that is not, or really kind of correcting exclusionary zoning and fast-tracking permitting. And so those are just a few in the volume. I highly recommend checking it out. And then I did want to go over, and I can go over quickly to pass it to Archie, and run these areas of mixed income success. And so Frankie mentioned a few of them that we talk about often. So I'll identify areas where we think things are going pretty well, particularly in these intentional mixed income communities that are often public housing redevelopments like at Foot Homes, and then where we need to keep working. So the areas, so there's our honeycomb, we call it. So the actual mixed income housing, as you saw in the video, if anyone saw in the beginning, just that the actual physical development is beautiful and high quality. There is neighborhood revitalization, new infrastructure, commercial development, access to amenities that may not have been there, or enhancing amenities that were already there. So those are the two areas we're doing pretty well. One area of concern and risk is around avoiding displacement by income and by race. So it's a big concern on really any of those approaches to mixed income. So beyond the public housing redevelopment process, but to any sort of mixed income, creating of a mixed income community, there's this risk that the community may be pushed in one direction or the other to higher income or lower income, which is where this yellow component fits in of attracting and retaining income and racial ethnic mix. And then the other areas where we focus a lot of our energy around inclusive social dynamics among residents of different races, different incomes. That's also between leadership and staffing on site, to the developers, to community members, city officials. So often, thinking about them on site, but also in this broader strategic way. And then economic mobility for all. So does the mixed income platform actually lead us to thriving, equitable neighborhoods and communities and housing developments? And so the areas in red are where we have put a lot of our attention and think that there's the most work to be done. And then these implications for success: to establish a shared vision, as Frankie talked about, explicit commitment to mixed income inclusion, advance capacity and knowledge building among all stakeholders, strengthen role clarity and accountability of all of those stakeholders, refine the strategies and operate with intentionality. And then we're always looking at this in terms of learning. So how can we assess and learn and continue to do better? And I did just want to do a quick shout out that our organization, the National Initiative on Mixed Income Communities, has been working with Urban Strategies and a policy organization, the Center for the Study of Social Policy in DC, around what we call a Mixed Income Strategic Alliance. And there's a network, the two network members are in this Mixed Income Innovation and Action Network are Memphis and Heritage Park. So I just wanted to mention that. Margaret.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grass. I have a laundry list of questions. However, since we're a little short on time, I'd like to get the local perspective. I am a proud native Memphian, Mr. Willis. However, I've not always been in the room where it happened. So I think many of us are interested to hear your local perspective.
Well, thank you. And sorry about the technical difficulties. Hopefully you can hear and see me now. So I'm a firm believer, number one, in the whole concept of economic integration, and which is, mixed income housing, mixed income neighborhoods, and have been fortunate enough to participate in most of the city's efforts in that regard around Hope 6, which was designed to provide mixed income housing. Realistically, when you think about the other Hope 6 sites prior to South City, which I'll touch on in a minute, we had mixed income housing, but when you look at the actual mix of incomes, it's a fairly narrow spectrum in terms of the folks at the bottom rungs of the ladder in terms of economics, and those at the higher levels in terms of economics. And you really didn't have, in many cases, what I would say a lot of true market rate residents. So even the folks that are considered market rate, which means there are no income restrictions or rent restrictions, their ability to pay was not significantly different from some of the other residents that will be qualifying under the tax credit program. But in South City, we're really trying to create a much broader spectrum of incomes. And I'm a proud Memphian too, and actually grew up in South Memphis. So I grew up in an economically integrated neighborhood. And it was integrated. It was interesting to hear the presentation at lunch by Mr. Rothstein. It was integrated economically primarily because it was a segregated neighborhood. So it was a neighborhood comprised of predominantly African Americans. And that was a time before there were integrated neighborhoods, and he actually took us through kind of the history. And I was aware, but had kind of forgotten to a point about the early integrated neighborhoods that he referenced in the 1920s and 1930s. So in my era, when you start talking about the 60s and 70s, the city of Memphis was extraordinarily segregated. And I grew up in South Memphis, not too far away from South City, in fact, blocks away. But in that neighborhood, we had, every social economic demographic in the community. My dad was an attorney and a business person, and actually ventured into politics for a while. My mom at the time did not work outside the home, and she had 5 kids to tend to, so to speak. But we were very fortunate, as they say, we're very blessed, as people say. But our neighbors were all walks of life, from the unskilled laborers, school teachers, doctors, business owners, folks that worked at the plants that were around the community. And we all were in the same community. We went to church together. We shopped in the same places. We hung out, so to speak, in the same places. And most of us went to schools. Now, my family was a bit different when it came to schools. We were busy integrating the Memphis City school system at the time. So we were shipped off, if you will, to schools outside of our neighborhood. My brother, in fact, was one of the 13 kids that integrated the school system, and I followed him 2 years later. So we did not attend school at that time in the neighborhood, but we'd come home and still play with and hang out with those same families. We're not in school with them, and again, attended church and social activities and all the other organizations. So it was a vital part of our lives in terms of interacting with people from all walks of life, and it really helps both sides, if you will, from the perspective of resources. It gives them an opportunity to interact with people and understand their situations and potentially even be helpful, and to gain a little bit more insight and to get rid of some of the perceptions, the stereotypes that people might grow up with in terms of their feelings about people that may not have the same economic standing that they have. And for the folks that had more limited resources, it was an opportunity for them to just get to know folks and also to be exposed. And I think the element of exposure is significantly underestimated in communities. And to have the opportunity to be exposed to different people, different walks of lives, to hear about some of their experiences that people have experienced themselves, it's just a dynamic interchange and certainly leads to a better society from all sides. So it's been a significant challenge to try to regain that. And that really started to change in the early 70s when some of the barriers to integration began to come down. And families, including my own, decided to move out of our home neighborhood. And in our case, there were some other factors involved in terms of why we moved. Idea of we can move into what was considered to be a nicer neighborhood. And even the neighborhood where I live now, which actually was the neighborhood that we moved to, it's still somewhat economically integrated, but at the time that we moved, transitioning from predominantly white to predominantly African American. And in fact, my mom bought her house from a older white family that was actually retiring and moving to Florida. But the neighborhood that we grew up in at that time was probably 85, 90% white. And today, it's about 95% African American. Up until 2 or 3 years ago, it was 100% African American. And what we're beginning to see now, it's in a midtown community, is the white communities are moving back. So we now have a couple of white neighbors in our neighborhood that were not there about 3 years ago. And it's interesting to see the dynamic there in terms of the transition from predominantly white to predominantly African American. And I don't know where we're going to end up. We don't plan on moving, so it'll at least have some element of African American. And I know many of my neighbors have no plans to either. So it's going to maintain some element of African American presence for the foreseeable future. But you just start looking at these trends and how people and mobilities come into play and how people. Schools also, as Mr. Rothstein mentioned, it's an important part of that. When you think about other neighborhoods, I live on Parkway, for those Memphians, between Lamar and Airways. And just, we're bounded by a set of railroad tracks. Just to the north of us is Cooper Young. And Cooper Young is a totally different community, although it's literally, I can see new houses in Cooper Young from my backyard. And Cooper Young is probably one of the prime potential examples of gentrification that will occur in our city in terms of, but it's economically integrated now, but one of the driving forces are the schools. And that one of those being the Maxine Smith STEAM Academy, that is considered to be one of the model schools, particularly for really, really smart kids in terms of getting good education in the public school system in a school that's not in one of the suburban communities. So it's drawing a lot of people there because of the schools. We also have a very vibrant restaurant and food district in Cooper Young that, you drive there on a nice evening, Friday, Saturday evening, it's full of people. And so it's just a different, interesting dynamic of how we have moved from an economically integrated community in South Memphis to one that became economically disintegrated. It was still predominantly African American. And the challenges we have with those neighborhoods is that spiral. Once people start moving from the neighborhood, the next level of economic mobility, they decide to move. And with each move that leaves a house or complex vacant, that may or may not get occupied with the same level of economic resources to maintain it. And it starts declining potentially. And again, it's just a spiral continues and continues. And then you get to the point where you have abandoned houses, and then you get to vacant lots. And the vacant lots tend to spread like cancer in our communities. And I drive back through my neighborhood, and it really brings tears to your eyes when you see the streets that you used to ride a bicycle on and walk your path to church are full of vacant lots and abandoned houses. So there's a lot of work to be done. We need to figure out, and I appreciate some of the commentary that Taryn and Frankie have provided. And interesting, actually, the approaches that Taryn just mentioned, we are probably employing those, not necessarily intentionally, because we hadn't necessarily done all the research and figured it out, but intuitively, we know that some of these things work. So we're doing some of these things and trying to make these communities better. And we do need to be much more intentional about the fact that we need to have vibrant, economically integrated neighborhoods. And I'm ideally racially integrated. I'm not on that bandwagon personally. It's a good thing, and I'm not against it, but I'm not on that bandwagon. and I'm, a firm believer in having good, strong, solid, economically integrated, vibrant African American neighborhoods throughout our city, and that's what we're trying to accomplish in South.
That is excellent. Thank you so much for your perspective. And I've been given some very strict marching orders that unfortunately we now need to segue into our question and answer period. So let me see, where do we have any direct messages for me with regard to questions? Well, there's been quite a bit of commentary I see in the chat. Well, I do have one question that I see in the chat here. There are many people who believe that, oh, excuse me, I think it's coming to me through direct messages. Okay, there are many people who believe that desegregation has been a detriment to African Americans because of what Mr. Willis is pointing out today. Everyone lived in the same neighborhood and was able to support and lift everyone else. Do any of the panelists have any thoughts on this?
I would like to that. I mean, I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and was, white person bused to the black side of town, a very segregated city, similar probably to Memphis. And I guess if I had to come down on the side of one versus the other, I'm going to agree with Archie, but that's hard for me to do, because I don't know how we make our democracy work ultimately if we don't figure out how to integrate across race. So I have spent a lot of my life working on the mixing across race. And so I still really, really believe we have to work at both. But I really respect and understand the idea of income integration within race is an important part of our societal evolution too. So that's not a full answer, but that's where I'm sitting today.
I'll just add, it's one of those things where you really have to ponder a lot, and depending on your circumstances, even your thoughts for today, you could come out on either side. But historically, when you look at the evolution, particularly in African American community, although we suffered some enormous atrocities during the desegregated era, we had a lot of thriving African American businesses. We had thriving African American professionals, particularly in the medical profession. And we had entrepreneurs. We had grocery store owners, and I knew two of them in my neighborhood. But to say it all kind of fell apart, if you will, due to integration is probably an oversimplification. There are a lot of factors that go into, the complexities of society. A lot of the changes in society as a whole play into it. So it's an interesting question to ponder, and I don't think you can say yes or no. I think there is some cause and effect. It's not absolute. And I do think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned in time to study kind of the before and after, and try to learn from the positive aspects of the before and apply them to the after, because number one, we aren't going back to a totally desegregated society. That's not going to happen. And I don't think that's anybody's ambition or wish. So that's, and talk about that. We have an integrated society. It's not as integrated as it could be, or in some people's minds it should be. So, there are a lot of advantages to having a sustainable African American community, and with all kinds of folks in the community at all levels of the economic spectrum, contributing to the overall benefit and betterment of the community. So anyway, it's a good, interesting question, and to whoever who posed it, I say give it some thought, and you can draw your own conclusions about what that really means.
Thank you so much, Mr. Willis. We have another question for the panel. There are many people who believe that desegregation has been a detriment to African Americans. Wait a minute, that's the question we just discussed. I had another question that is escaping me. All right, let's see. We have a question specifically for you, Ms. Blackburn. As you help companies build trust in development and design processes, what challenges do you face as an expert coming in from another city? There are multiple parts to this question, by the way. How do you build trust relationships on the ground when helping in Pittsburgh and places outside of the DC area? What coalitions do you build or local leaders do you rely on? And how do you assess or address any historical mistrust that may already surround their work?
That's a great question. I'll use I'll go back to Trek because we're on record as really written about their work. First of all, we have been urging them to change the way they hire and to hire more locally and to be more diverse and to build their racial awareness as a group of leaders, which that would, if you were to call up the CEO, he would tell you that that's something we've been working on with them. They still have a ways to go, but they are changing how they approach their staffing, especially at the site level. We actually, in one of the it was a choice planning grant, and we did a lot of organizing in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh. They didn't end up getting the grant, but it was during the planning process. We supported them in hiring the community builder from the neighborhood, but making sure that it was a community builder that brought the skills and the approach that we were hoping that they would buy into. So we did a lot of back and forth in the hiring process. It wasn't just in and out. I mean, I don't know in COVID age how I do this work. I'm struggling. But in the non-COVID age, I spent a lot of time on the ground in spaces, going back and forth, driving, flying, and being in spaces. I'm a practitioner. I'm a site-based person. I am not a consultant at heart. That's how I do it.
All right, panelists, is there anything else from anyone or anything anyone would like to add? I've been given a second set of marching orders to wrap up our session. Unfortunately, an hour was not enough time for this wonderful conversation. It's not.
I do just want to grab someone to ask whether or not this should be approached with an anti-racist lens, and I wanted to say absolutely. I'm echoing a little bit, but so I noted that, and Frankie is helping us and work with others, but internally that is how we frame our thinking around our work. And then now we're working with other organizations who want to also think about that. So everything from house rules to kind of broader strategic ways of approaching development and programming within communities, but just wanted to say that yes, absolutely, that is essential. And I guess back to the point of whether or not integrated neighborhoods are helpful, I would say that in today's era, one of the points that we make is around proximity, and without proximity to others that are different from us, how can we get beyond the things that divide us? For putting throwing that out there too, why integration might be positive.
Thank you. And Mr. Willis, do you have any points before we wrap up our session today? Any closing points?
Not really. I appreciate the opportunity to have a dialogue. And as you said, it's too short of a period. Really cover the conversation. Perhaps we can dig a little deeper, and I see comments or questions or comments that are good. So we need to reconvene at another time.
Absolutely, I agree. I truly appreciate all of you joining us today. Thank you for joining today's session. And for more information on our partners in today's session, please visit the virtual exhibit hall and stay tuned for the upcoming sessions. But thank you, everyone. This was a very important and meaningful conversation. Thank you.